Welcome to the Leadership by Design podcast, where thoughtful leaders share lessons from their journey. I'm David Adams, founder of the Business Freedom Group, and today we have Thomas Gilbert of Hortus AI. And please welcome Thomas. I'd love to start off with you telling our audience a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got here.
Thanks, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here. Happy to share more about my journey. For me, the way I often describe this is I came into AI at a time that is earlier than most people in the field. I really entered it in earnest in spring 2016, almost exactly a decade ago. And there was a clear reason for that at the time, and then there was a deeper reason for that that bubbled up, and I'll share both. The clear reason was that there was a new algorithm that had just been developed that beat all the world's best board game players, basically, of any board game you can imagine. At the time, the kind of holy grail was the game of Go, which is an ancient Chinese
Mhm.
board game. It was widely assumed to be too complicated for any existing learning algorithm to be highly proficient at, if not better than humans at. And actually, we just sort of blew through that unexpectedly. And I became fascinated with that. I learned very quickly about how it worked and how it was built, and frankly, how easy it was to build something like that. And that's what convinced me that this fascination I'd had with technology, and in particular with this supposed notion that technology was exponentially improving with time, that really convinced me that now was the moment for AI to start happening, that it was going to stop being science fiction and start being reality. And indeed, the next several years did bear that out. So that was the transition moment for me. That was my kind of Sputnik moment, you could say.
Mhm.
Now there's a deeper though side of it, which is probably the reason I was willing to divert my career. I was in the middle of a PhD program at Berkeley that I left, resigned from, and instead designed an interdisciplinary program of my own in what we would now call AI ethics or AI governance. That wasn't a field yet, so I named it something much more cerebral and academic. But that's basically what I was studying.
Okay.
And the reason I took it so personally, the reason why the stakes were so existential for me was that I grew up in a very poor part of the country of America. I'm not from the West Coast. There's many aspects of Bay Area culture that, I mean, to this day, remain a bit strange to me. But were very much so, even at the time in mid 2010s. I grew up in southern Ohio, basically Appalachia, and I grew up on a farm there, and it was very hard scrabble. It's always been a hard scrabble region of the country, but it's also a very important part of the country. Edgar Allan Poe actually thought Appalachia was a better name for the country than America. He wrote that. For many centuries, it was considered the border of what this country could be. And the war on poverty was launched there. There's a whole part of our of the in efforts at social progress that kind of crested and frankly withered and died at the altar of that population of the people that live there. And when this AI stuff started to happen, what that convinced me also was that if we didn't do this right, if we didn't build the technology correctly, if we didn't deploy it and implement it in a deeply reflexive, responsible, stakeholder-driven way, what it would really do is make 7 or 8 billion people around the world culturally Appalachian. And what I mean by that is the story of that region, the identity of it, is that you are in proximity to systems that are trying to understand you, help you, classify you, move you along, whether that's hospitals, whether that's schools, whether that's local government, whether that's the job market, you name it. And the history of that region is that those systems have always failed you. They've always either failed to help you or they've hurt you in ways that are extractive, that you're a kind of resource to be mined. And so that's whether that's coal, whether that's lumber, whether that's water, whether that's the enrichment of uranium, different parts of the Appalachian story all reflect that. And I became convinced that that would just happen now with data, with human experience and emotion, with the way we process and understand things. Indeed, now we're seeing some of the largest data centers actually in the world are now being proposed, perhaps not coincidentally for that region specifically. So I became convinced of that danger, of the human stakes, basically, of it because of how personal it was to me. And I don't think I would have steered myself so strongly
Mm.
and gone whole hog into this field had it not been for that personal side of it for me.
Well, it's a story I resonate with. Mine is a little bit different. I saw the huge difference between the Boston, New York, Washington corridor and backwoods New England. I had experience in both,
Hmm.
and very different cultures. But now, it's really fascinating that you've dedicated yourself towards ethics in AI, and I do think a lot of people are concerned about how AI can be managed ethically. So, can you tell us a little bit about trends you're seeing in the industry, and how leaders can impact how
Hmm.
AI gets used?
So the trends that I'm seeing are very much informed by that perspective I just was speaking from, which are, and this is, really what happened is, November 30th, 2022, the date that shall live in infamy, at least within AI. That's the date that ChatGPT kind of announced itself to the world. Since then, AI became not only real, but specifically kind of B2C. There was this new giant new market segment.
Right.
I don't know if the word segment does it justice. Now you have billions of people, regularly using this. ChatGPT is one of the top 5 or top 6 sites visited worldwide. It's a remarkable development in terms of the scale. What we've seen since then is, I'm sorry to say, many of the things that I suspected might happen, which are, on the one hand, that people become increasingly enamored with and habituated with, accustomed to this type of interface, this type of open language or image or even video interface where they can kind of pour out themselves into it and get in response really anything you can think of under the sun. We've seen that. We continue to see it, the scale and the intensity, that exponential curve that I was referencing earlier. We are seeing it play out in the richness of that feedback loop between users and that infrastructure. The flip side of that is we are seeing millions of people passively becoming addicted to that interface. We
Mhm.
are seeing environmental implications and devastation on a scale that, I mean, sadly and tragically was predicted. This really isn't surprising. One of the first and most influential papers about the risks of that, in particular stochastic parrots, was written by some folks at Google who were shortly after that kind of shunted away from Google because of the implications of that paper. That paper is actually widely misunderstood. It was read at the time as saying that language models are not actually smart because they're just stochastic parrots. In other words, they're just randomly parroting
Right.
outputs in response to inputs. But if you actually look close, like really what they say in the paper is that they're going to induce greenhouse gas emissions on a scale beyond even what we've been accustomed to. Like it's really that side of it they're concerned about. And sadly, I think that is in fact what's happening. All of the human ecosystem, whether our minds, our emotions, our actual climate, is slowly being offered up as grist for the mill of more and more AI capabilities. So it's that almost kind of ecological lens on the relationship between AI and the human condition. That's really where the ethical question lies for me. So I mean it quite broadly. Really, it captures not only ethics, but politics, culture, identity, first and foremost. A lot of stuff that we've taken for granted, frankly, for a long time. And I think the positive side of it, and this is answering your question, what is the ethics then? I think the ethics is, first of all, for business leaders, actually in part, to help serve as beacons of asking what it would mean for us to become more aware of those things in the context of this technology. How can we factor in these other things beyond just the brute cost of implementing a given model? How can we take these other human factors in mind and ecological factors in mind when we're deciding whether or how to onboard a technology this disruptive? And that's been the entry point for me and for the business that I'm pursuing.
So that's sort of platform scale ethics. Is there a way also that individual business leaders need to look at how they're applying AI into their business? The micro scale. Are there ethical concerns, ethical things they should be addressing when they look at how to apply it?
Certainly. And the two are distinct. They are also intimately related to each other and they impact each other. At the micro level, businesses, and this depends on scale. So if we're talking, yeah, even small to medium-sized businesses, I mean, often the allure of this technology is that it enables you to imagine what it might mean if you went from being a small business owner to managing a team of, say, 50 agents,
Hmm.
let's say, where each agent has a different job, you know. That's how, I mean, these things are basically built to automate human tasks, and so it's no leap of the imagination to say they basically can be unpaid employees, so to speak, that don't need to get a W-2. So what does that mean? They could answer your email, they could manage your social media account, they could handle your finances, they could help you depending on your business, they could help you even design new logos or new products, or they could help you, I mean, basically market yourself in these new ways. There's a lot of things they can do, frankly, better or more efficiently or faster than a human can, so long as the task is well defined. So that's often where it lies at the micro level is do business owners actually understand whatever the task is precisely enough that they can delegate it in a way that they can actually trust the outcome? And the answer to that is often that out of the box, business owners don't. Through no fault of their own, it's just that humans have a lot of common sense. We have a
Hmm.
lot of know-how. When you hire somebody to be, for example, your receptionist, there's a whole host of things, the vast majority of things, that you never tell them to do or not do, that it would never even occur to them to violate
Right.
because they've been so deeply socialized into a certain pattern of behavior. That's not
Hmm.
true of AI agents at all. It's a matter of, I mean, yeah, you think about this. If you were to quote unquote employ an AI agent and you told it, handle my email box, basically. I'm
Hmm.
getting too much spam. There's a few of my contacts, and you can just look to see who I'm most in contact with. Those are the most important ones. You can delegate some of that to me, but the vast majority of it, I just want you to reply in this very, standardized way. Well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is your circle of contacts is going to pretty quickly diminish.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to contract. Yeah, and not only contract, it's going to devolve in ways that you don't really understand because what's missing is precisely the human spark that lies behind. You can always tell, even now, no matter how powerful these things become, you can really always easily tell if you've received an email from a person or from a machine. I mean, it literally just was a few days ago. I was in a correspondence with somebody, and suddenly their voice changed, and I was like, "Okay, you've chosen to automate this exchange." And I called them out on it. It's not just that I thought that. I
Right.
was like,
Right.
I made the decision of like, this is unprofessional. This
Mm.
is not appropriate. And I put they in quotes because who knows if it was really them, said, "Could you clarify?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is obviously ChatGPT. What you just wrote. It's disrespectful. This is either a relationship that you value or it's not." And
Right.
that's the point, is that I think it really needs to be, it can't be overemphasized. AI agents or chatbots do not inherently value anything. They can only value what they do instrumentally towards the arbitrary pursuit of some goal. They can't decide a goal, and they also can't assess in any value specific way what means are most appropriate to that goal. Not unless those guardrails have been very clearly set up for them. And often, I think 9 times out of 10, the work of setting up those guardrails is so great that you're actually more likely to save yourself time and energy and emotional labor not automating it and just trusting a person who does, well in an interview, or who or that you trust them. And there's a reason for that. And then the natural flow of the relationship is if they do their job well, then they stay on or maybe even get promoted. And if they don't, then they get let go. And nothing like that rhythm has yet been like figured out for what these agents are.
Well, it's interesting, what you're saying. It occurs to me, what are the goals that are safe to give to the automation? Like I have a customer right now who's figuring out how to have their people do less cut and paste so that when a vendor submits invoices to them, it automatically goes into their accounting system from email to account. And somebody has to review that to make sure that those are valid invoices and all that sort of stuff. Automating the cut and paste function, they're making their employee more valuable by their doing the higher value work. So a framework that occurred to me, but it may be too naive, so I'm interested in your reaction, is where someone sees an opportunity to increase the revenue of the company per employee, that would be like a valid broad goal as opposed to just short-term reducing profits by reducing the number of employees. That if you can increase the capacity, the productivity of the organization, and big caveat, without diminishing the customer experience, then that to me sounds like the beginning of some guardrails that might work. What react to that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's the labor capital relationship, right? So for hundreds of years, business owners have been faced with the question of whether or how to replace labor with capital. This was the Industrial Revolution, right? When or how or is it appropriate to replace people working in a textile at a textile, right? They're doing the loom kind of thing. When is it appropriate to replace them with the textile machine, with an assembly line like workflow? And we are now faced with a deeper version of that, which is really more like when is it appropriate to replace cognitive labor with cognitive capital? Because that's really what AI amounts to. In other words, when is it appropriate to replace the kind of work that people used to do, not just physically, but mentally, and how they represent tasks, how they organize their own workflow, how they know where certain things are and put things together in a way that where they are in your division of labor is reasonably productive. When or how is it appropriate to replace that human way of doing it with an equivalent or better degree of productivity that might be, or that might be cheaper because you found a way to centralize it through some kind of automated software or machine. That's basically what we're talking about. So I think my point is, there is no single answer to that question for all time. You can look to history. There are contexts in which, I mean, the famous line I just was thinking of, it's interesting. I should predicate this by saying this is not an endorsement of his methods. But Henry Ford was saying, there's a quote from Henry Ford where he said that he didn't want any car coming off his assembly line that none of his workers could afford. Or rather, I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically
Yeah,
something like
no, I get it.
every car that comes off the assembly line should be one that is within the budget of any of his employees. Now, I think the significance of that quote is that what you're doing when you're transforming a workflow across your entire organization, whether that's a small business or whether that's enterprise, what you're really doing is changing the culture of your brand and of
Mhm.
your company in the eyes of its stakeholders. And those stakeholders could be its customers, they could be its investors, they
Mhm.
could be its workers, they could be its management. I mean, in fact, they're all those are stakeholders, right? Now, different companies make different decisions about that, and that manifests in how people think about them, right? Just for the sake of imagining this, imagine, like, I mean, this is a good example. This was several years ago when for example, Amazon bought Whole Foods. It was a huge piece of news. It was not only huge because Amazon was already a giant conglomerate and Whole Foods itself was no small chicken, so to speak. Also a very established brand. I think the reason it was such a big deal was people were very, I mean, curious, excited, but also anxious and maybe even somewhat scared of how different the cultures of those organizations are. Whole Foods was a company that originally was founded in Austin, Texas, to have a very specific and unique relationship with its stakeholders, very grounded, very holistic, very integrated. Nourish the earth, nourish our stakeholders. This is the kind of mantra of Whole Foods. Pretty different than the mantra of Amazon. And the mantra of Amazon, well, it's basically, I mean, the biggest supply chains you can, make the biggest ones you can at the lowest margin of cost and see what emerges. That's all there in the name, Amazon. Pretty different, right, than Whole Foods. And so there's a lot of curiosity. How do those two things interweave with each other? And indeed, if you spend time at Whole Foods, which sometimes I do, you will see that, and I was there also, I was shopping there before the purchase, the acquisition. It's changed. The experience has changed in ways that do manifest in terms of the culture. So, and the reason is that the relationship with stakeholders is, itself what is at stake, frankly. So if you're a smaller organization, I actually think the risk might even be greater when it comes to this technology because these tools, and they really ought to be thought of as tools, are designed to be at least as good, if not quote unquote, better than any person. And for a small organization, that means that there's a real risk or even likelihood that they will eat your culture for breakfast. They will, whatever you put them to, they will induce feedback loops between your inbox and your customers, between your marketing and your customer acquisition and deal flow that you might not fully understand. It might be better. It's much more likely to be just something that's just completely unprecedented with respect to your own organization. And so I think the most important thing people should ask is, if you're a small business owner, for example, what do I want my company to look like after we onboard? Can I concretely imagine what it would look like if we did start using Copilot or start
Mhm.
actually proactively using Claude or something like this, and we put it to all these uses? What would happen? Not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of, return to your business statement, right? Like, what would it affect your slogan? Would it affect your core business values? The answer is yes, it would. But how would it affect them, right? Try and
Right.
be as concrete with yourself as you can about how it would affect them. Would it advance the values? Would it curtail them? Would it change their relationship with each other? These are all different vectors of change. And I think the real lesson here is that business owners can't afford to take that for granted anymore. You have to
I
assume that,
think
yeah.
that's great. Thinking through the impacts, before you launch down a way, some of the use cases are very broad. So I'm just going to bring it back down to that use case I mentioned before. There may be some negative impacts I haven't thought about, but the idea of scraping invoices out of emails and putting them into the accounting system automatically, what that's allowing this person to do is to, even though they have a portal where the suppliers could upload their invoices without requiring this. It
Right.
allows them to use smaller, less sophisticated suppliers who, so it's supporting the mom and pop shops, if you will, by not requiring that they have the same level of sophistication of some of the bigger suppliers. Because at the moment, there's an internal tax on hand-holding the smaller suppliers. And so by scraping this out, and they're leveling the playing field internally so that using a smaller supplier is just as convenient as using a bigger one.
That is true. It is also true that unless the tool that's been used has been built by that mom and pop store in-house, they better update the terms of use for their customers because effectively all the data and information that that tool would be processing in order to complete a request like that would also be shared and available to whatever company is providing it. So if the mom and pop store is comfortable with that, that's their business, but they also need to confirm and be clear with their own stakeholders about the way that's being transformed. It is a different type of risk that needs to be decided. I'm not saying don't take it. I'm saying business owners are faced with risks all the time. The question is, what is a good calculated risk? Most of the biggest companies building these so-called frontier models are being sued by some very large and respected and established brands for data stealing, basically because that's what they are. They're just vacuum cleaners for data all over the place, all over the internet. Effectively, we've been training these models without knowing it since the 90s because we've just been putting so much of ourselves online and out there as if the internet was this free public resource. And now we're dealing with this kind of Standard Oil, Andrew Carnegie type moment where they're kind of jumping in and gobbling up as much as they can. So by no means, I mean, that's just the reality of where we are. So does that mean don't drive a car or don't consume oil? I mean, no, it doesn't mean that. It just means understand that the risks are different, the scale is different, and as a mom and pop store, if you're deciding to onboard an agent in the use case you're describing, for example, put some thought into which one. That's what I would suggest. Don't say no, out of the gate. Consider it carefully, and weigh them against each other on your terms. I think that's what's most important.
And I loved your use of the word stakeholder. That's something I believe in, right? You've got multiple stakeholder customers, community, suppliers, employees, owners, right? Those are all key stakeholders. So if I were to try to extract sort of a summary statement of some of what you were saying, would it be fair to say, your advice to small to medium-sized business owners is think through the impact on the stakeholders?
Yeah, 100%, including yourself. I mean, you're kind
Yeah.
of stakeholder number one because you're the owner of the business. That's right. I mean, I literally, I mean, I use these tools, right, all the time, to do all sorts of things. It also creates new kinds of work for me because I had to
Hmm.
ask myself, oh, this thing that I was going to spend maybe a week doing, now I can do it, get it done in 5 minutes because I'm using this tool. So that's great. But what is that? First of all, what am I going to do with the rest of the week? And so I have to kind of jump ahead. That's an opportunity. I have a lot more time to dedicate towards other tasks and goals for that reason. But then the other side of it is, yeah, like what are the consequences of me doing that? Do I need to update? Do I need to update something about what we're communicating to our stakeholders so that they understand that decision that we've made? Can I frame it in a way that is true to our core values? That's why this isn't, again, you're not a nihilist and you're not amoral just because you're jumping on AI adoption. I think the point is to re-articulate what your values are and how those values are reframed now that you have an AI-driven workplace, an AI-driven workflow, depending on where you put it. The decision on how you integrate it is often a way that ends up playing out. And there are lots of businesses that don't put that thought in, and you can tell. You see that manifest pretty quickly. I mean, I gave the example of somebody who just started using, ChatGPT to start talking to me. It's deeply insulting. People don't like to feel that way. And again, it's personal for me just because when you grew up in a place where the predominant culture is one of feeling disrespected, this kind of learned cynicism, I know what that feels like when it becomes endemic, and it's not good for anybody. There's no stakeholder who benefits from that, including the companies.
Yeah.
They end up suffering too.
Well, I think rethinking and re-articulating your values in the age of AI, I love that as a kind of a big statement. And so, I'll thank you again, Thomas. It was a real pleasure to speak to you. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Leadership by Design to keep your thinking fresh from thoughtful leaders like Thomas. And we'll see you next time.